In this video, I will be demonstrating how to make a basil oil, but really this technique and method can be used to make any sort of green herb oil, parsley, cilantro, especially a tender leaf green herb. But here we're using basil because basil is very, very common. And here I'm stripping away all the leaves and I'm separating them from the stems, but I like to save the stems, and we'll actually use the stems in the basil oil too. That's something that a lot of people omit, but I think it adds a beautiful flavor. Now here we're just bringing a large pot of water to a boil, heavily salting it, adding our blanching basket. You've seen all this before. We're basically just doing the leafy green blanching techniques, and as you drop those basil leaves into that boiling salted water, the air that is contained within the leaves is going to collapse, darkening the leaves themselves, turning a dark green, and wilting the greens. And here we've boiled literally for about 20 seconds, and I'm just dropping into an ice bath and stirring with a spoon just to get rid of any sort of the thermal hot spots that occur, and cooling down as rapidly as possible. Now, once it's nice and cool, I'm just turning out onto a paper towel. Next, I'm going to go back and blanch the stems, and I'm blanching the stems separately because they need to boil much longer to become tender. And they're a lot more sturdy than the leaves of the basil. So here I'm boiling for about 2 to 3 minutes. And once they become tender, I'm going to go back again and shock them. And the stem of an herb plant arguably contains the most flavor. So it's kind of a shame that a lot of people leave the stems out of the herb oil making process. Now, once you have your blanched stems and greens, go ahead and drop it into a blender. Here I'm using 200 grams of the cooked herbs and 600 grams of canola oil, which you want to use a neutral flavored oil, and blending it on high for about anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds, just until a fine particulate puree forms. If you have a cheaper blender, you might need to blend a little bit longer. Now, this is a step that a lot of people skip. After blending, you want to place your herb oil back into a pot and then ready a ice bath. And here I'm just adding a good amount of kosher salt to my ice water bath to drop that ice temperature, so that way it super chills the bath, and then I can chill my oil when I go to cook it. Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to place the blended oil over a high flame and whisk continuously for 3 to 4 minutes until it starts to just barely come up to a simmer. And you can see the oil has darkened. If you waft that the aroma towards you, it's going to smell very much like basil. Now here I'm going to drop into a steel container. You don't want to use plastic because plastic doesn't transfer heat as well. So I'm dropping into a steel container. I'm whisking and chilling as quickly as possible. And once it's nice and cool and it's dropped down to refrigeration temperature, I'm going to pour this into a storage container using a rubber spatula to scrape out anything along the walls to make sure I get a full yield, and then cover this with a lid and place in my refrigerator for 24 to 48 hours. And this is going to allow a final infusion of both color and flavor. Now, after about 24 hours, this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to do one initial straining through a chinois or just a fine mesh strainer, scraping out those sides again of the container to make sure I have as little waste as possible. And go ahead and push this through, because at this point in the straining process, you just want to extract as much flavor as possible. And you will be pushing some pulp through and some particulate matter through. So that's why after the initial straining through the chinois, you want to go back and strain it again through a napkin. And here's just a regular, linen napkin, anything that's lint-free. And you're going to go back and just squeeze it and wring it out gently. And this is going to give you a nice crystal clear basil oil that doesn't have a bunch of particles floating around in it, which will screw up your color and just the overall visual appeal. At this point, you're ready to serve. Store it in a container. You can see this beautiful color that the basil oil has given us by using this technique. For more information, check out this episode's show notes at stellaculinary.com/KP24.